Hello and welcome to more notable names of Hispanic and Latin American history. Yeah, today we're doing an interesting individual, a Miss Loreta Janeta Velazquez. Yeah, she is an interesting individual. Believe her date of birth was in June of 1842. I believe she died somewhere around 1897. But she's kind of tied with the Confederate Army in the Civil War because of what she did. As you can read, the title, Lieutenant. Yeah, apparently she disguised herself as a man and fought in the U.S. Civil War. Or at least that's what she proclaims in her book. Just about everything that historians know about Loreta Janeta or Janeta Velazquez comes from her book, The Woman in Battle, a narrative of the exploits, adventures, and travels of Madame Loreta Janeta Velazquez, otherwise known as Lieutenant Harry T. Buford, Confederate States Army. Some of the incidents in the book have been verified, but there are many facts still in question. What is known is that Velazquez was born in Cuba on June the 26th, 1842, to a wealthy family. In 1849, she was sent to school in New Orleans, where she resided with her aunt, and at the age of 14, she had eloped with an officer in the Texas Army. When Texas seceded from the Union in 1861, her husband joined the Confederate Army, and Velazquez pleaded with him to allow her to join him. Undeterred by her husband's refusal, Velazquez had a uniform made and disguised herself as a man, taking the name Harry T. Buford. Now displaying the self-awarded rank of lieutenant, Velazquez moved to Arkansas, where she proceeded to raise a regiment of volunteers. Locating her husband in Florida, she brought the regiment to him, presenting herself as their commanding officer. Her husband's reaction is not recorded in history, as just a few days later he was killed in a shooting accident. Velazquez would go north, acting as an independent soldier. She joined up with a regiment just in time to fight at the Battle of First Manassas Bull Run and the Battle of Ball's Bluff. Shortly afterwards, she once again donned female attire and went to Washington, D.C., where she was able to gather intelligence for the Confederacy. Upon her return to the South, she was made an official member of the Detective Corps. Apparently, espionage did not hold enough excitement for her, as she once again sought action on the battlefield. She resumed the disguise as Lieutenant Buford and traveled to Tennessee, joining up with another regiment to fight at the Battle of Fort Donelson on February 11th, 1862. She would be wounded in the foot, and fearing that her true gender would be revealed if she sought medical treatment in camp, she fled back to her home in New Orleans. And remember, this is all according to her accounts, because this is where we get this information. Again, some of the information has been said, yeah, this is things that happened, but the rest of it we can't fully verify. Still in the male disguise, she was arrested in New Orleans for being a possible Union spy. She was cleared of charges and was fined for impersonating a man and released. She immediately headed back to Tennessee in search of another regiment to join, and as luck would have it, found the regiment she had originally recruited in Arkansas and fought with them at the Battle of Shiloh on April 6th through 6th and 7th of 1862. Yeah, Battle of Shiloh was a bloody battle. While on burial detail, she was wounded in the side by an exploding shell, and an army doctor discovered her true gender. She decided at this point to end her career as a soldier and return to New Orleans. Not content to sit out the rest of the war, she then went to Richmond to volunteer her services as a spy. She was able to travel freely in both the South and the North, working in both male and female disguises, and during this time that she married Confederate Captain Thomas de Kaup. Unfortunately, he died in a hospital a short time later. After the war, she married a man identified only as Major Wasson and immigrated to Venezuela. After his death, she moved back to the U.S., where she traveled extensively in the West and gave birth to a baby boy. In 1876, Velazquez, in need of money to support her child, decided to publish her memoirs, The Woman in Battle, and was dedicated it to her Confederate comrades, who, although they fought in a losing cause, succeeded by their valor in winning the admiration of the world. The public reaction to the book at the time was mixed. Confederate General Jubal Early denounced it as pure fiction, but modern scholars have found some of it to be quite accurate. With the release of her book, she may have married for a fourth time and is last documented as living in Nevada. The date of her death is thought to be 1897, but there is no supporting evidence for this. In response to those who criticized the account of her life, she said that she hoped she would be judged with impartiality, as she only did what she thought to be right. And that was from the American Battlefield Trust. That's what they had on her. Loreta Janeta Velazquez. Let's look at this article from Tulane on WordPress, Tulane University, because it's civilwarwomen.wordpress.tulane.edu. So yeah. During the Civil War, some women completely broke out from the prescribed gender roles and put themselves in the midst of war. One of these women was Loreta Janeta Velazquez. She was a native Cuban who went to school in New Orleans but ran away to marry an officer in the U.S. Army, and after the outbreak of the Civil War, her husband resigned his commission to join the Confederate Army, and Velazquez determined to join him. Finding the battlefront no place for a lady the husband disapproved, Velazquez would defy him, found uniforms, and formed a new identity to fight in the war. In The Woman in Battle, Velazquez published a written and illustrated account of her endeavors. These illustrations were from separate pages of Velazquez's book, but here shown side by side to highlight the similarities and differences between Loreta Janeta Velazquez and her male counterpart. Harry T. Buford, First Lieutenant. So on the left is a portrait of Buford, and on the right, Velazquez. Now, they were both supposedly the same person. Again, we don't know for sure. But there are some things that have been verified as correct, and that's what makes this interesting. How much is factual? How much is not? Buford wears what is presumably a lieutenant's uniform, and it shows 2 rows of buttons and the start of a 3rd row. A typical lieutenant coat has 9 buttons per side in clusters of 3 each. The visible buttons imply a similar pattern. Buford also wears a military hat and has gentlemanly facial hair. The other image, Madame Velazquez in female attire, shows her wearing a feminine dress with a bow and a lace collar. Her hair is put up in a conservative style. The label Madame highlights the disparity between the gendered titles and just emphasizes her womanliness. Both faces have similar expressions, yet their features are slightly different despite actually being the same person. Buford has thicker, manlier eyebrows than Velazquez, while Velazquez's eyes are wider and brighter, perhaps a metaphor for her forward way of thinking and acting. Ironically, Buford has softer and more womanly facial features than Velazquez, such as a supple skin and button nose, perhaps the artist's attempt to make Velazquez's sex apparent to the reader despite her male attire. However, one would not necessarily know that Buford is really a woman just by looking at the picture. An implication, Velazquez as a woman has wrinkled skin and a long thin nose. Her older looking skin may be an implication of an age difference. The book looks at her life in retrospect, so the image of the swap of typical male and female features parallels Velazquez's subversion of the gender roles and her foray into the battlefront. In Frank Leslie's The Art of Inspiring Courage, which this is the image from the top left graphic shows a scene related to Velazquez and her husband's story. The sketch shows a husband and wife with a caption that reads, "How wives may make their husbands enlist." The lady saying, "Either you or I, sir." The woman in her bloomers stands over her kneeling husband with one hand gesturing towards him and the other holding a musket. The man has a look of disgust on his face, brought upon by the thought of his wife enlisting, similar to the disapproval Velazquez's husband must have felt when she wanted to join the army. The man in this case has to be the hero for his wife to preserve her respectability. And remember, this is in an age when gender roles were set much more firmly. So yeah. But Velazquez would not be told what is supposed to be her role. Let's see. The cartoon preserves the idea of women playing the staying in the domestic sphere and not venturing into the public or dangerous fields. However, it also has a progressive feminist undertones. At the time, there was much controversy about women's dress. Here, the woman's outfit connotes advancement in women's fashion that had women wearing clothing similar to those previously only worn by men. In a movement spearheaded by reformers such as Amelia Bloomer and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, women started to wear trousers in public and attempted to eliminate the stigma associated with this attire. She also wears a military cap, if you look at it on her head there, and which shows she is serious about her statement and she would enlist if her husband did not. In the image, the woman stands and takes control of the situation while her husband passively sits on his knees and listens to her. Unlike Velazquez, the woman in the sketch upholds period gender norms, invoking her privileged femininity to coerce her husband into joining the army, yet her attire hints at progress. Velazquez generally wanted to join the army and rebel against the standards set for women at this time. She effectively did so, since she successfully fought in many Civil War battles, supposedly, and eventually become a Confederate spy. So yeah. While she was fighting dressed as a man, she broke a lot of what was pretty hard set perceived gender norms. So yeah, let's look at Wikipedia finally here. Okay, this has her dying in 1923. We've seen 1897 beforehand here, so that's a curious difference there. Masqueraded as a male soldier, Battle of Shiloh, works as a Confederate spy, reporting to, I don't think a lot of people recognize this, the U.S. Secret Service. Yeah, Secret Service didn't start out as a protection group for the president. They were in espionage and spying. But yeah. Okay, according to historian William C. Davis, she died on January 1923 under the name Loreta J. Beard after many years away from the public eye in St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Most of her claims are not supportable with actual documents, and many are contradictable by actual documentation. So like we say, you kind of have to take this with a grain of salt. It's interesting, but there's only some of it that we can go, yeah, this happened, but we can't prove this or this. So yeah. Um, she was born in Havana, Cuba, to a wealthy Cuban official and a mother of French and American ancestry. Apparently, she also used the name Alice Williams. According to her own account, she was of Castilian descent and related to Cuban governor Diego Velazquez de Cuellar and artist Diego Velazquez. Her father, a Spanish government official who owned plantations in Mexico and Cuba, he felt a deep resentment toward the U.S. after losing an inherited ranch in the Mexican-American War at San Luis Potosi. It would also set up estrangement between Velasquez and her father after her elopement with an American soldier. She supposedly was inspired by Joan of Arc. So she apparently has a habit of engaging and eloping and yeah, John Williams, Raphael. Now, is this husband during the Civil War the John Williams? I believe that was right, because I think she mentioned it was a Texas U.S. Army officer. She initially lived with her aunt, but after a quarrel, moved in with her husband and lived at various army posts, estranging herself further from her family by converting to Methodism. She claimed she met Abraham Lincoln and Secretary of War Simon Cameron on one of her trips as a spy to D.C. Claiming to fight at the siege of Fort Donelson, at the Battle of Shiloh, and met Major General Benjamin F. Butler take command of the city of New Orleans. In Richmond, authorities again hired her as a spy to travel all around the U.S. At this time, she married Captain Thomas DeKalb, who would die shortly after in Chattanooga. After the war, she married a Major Wasan and immigrated with him to Venezuela, but he would die in Caracas, Venezuela, and she would return back to the U.S. Apparently, she met Brigham Young in Utah. So, apparently, she has this fantastical life meeting all these different people. She would arrive in Omaha almost penniless, but charmed General W.S. Harney into giving her blankets and a revolver. After her arrival in the mining area of Nevada, she received a proposal of marriage from a 60-year-old man, which she refused. Supposedly, she would marry a younger man, but his name is not known, left Nevada, traveling with her baby. In 1868, she encountered Mormons. However, she was not impressed by these pioneers wanting to return to civilization and goes to Texas, where apparently her story faded into obscurity. The book would come out in print in 1876. Shortly after the appearance, former Confederate General Jubal Early denounced the book as an obvious fiction. 2007, the History Channel aired Full Metal Corset, a program that presented details of Velazquez's story as genuine. However, the overall truthfulness of her account remains indeterminate and highly questionable. In 2013, there was a movie, Rebel Loreta Velazquez, Secret Soldier of the American Civil War, which was directed by Maria Agui Carter and released that presented Velazquez's story as genuine based on Velazquez's memoir. Let's see. Dion Blanton, senior military analyst for the National Archives, states in that documentary that her memoir took her life story and made it a little better. Blanton and other scholars addressed the claim of former Confederate General Jubal Early that the book is a fiction, but indicate that they largely believe Velazquez. We can corroborate quite a bit of what she writes, says Blanton of the National Archives. So again, it's hard to say what is fully correct and what is exaggerated. Like we say, some things have been confirmed because we were able to find evidence of it, but otherwise, yeah. Anyway, yeah, Loreta Janeta Velazquez. Again, hard to really parse out the actual truth and facts besides the few things we have been able to confirm. And the few things we have been able to disprove. But again, an interesting story for the time. But yeah, we'll go ahead and end this episode there. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.